Action. Okay. Right. So, in this second interview, as part of the Dances Us series, this week we're working with the theme of Z is for Spin, which means dance for anyone who doesn't know. Today, I'm speaking with Rosemary Lee, who is a London-based dancer and choreographer. She's known for working in a variety of contexts and media, and her 30-year body of work spans large-scale site-specific works with cross-generational casts, solos for herself and other performers, video installations, and short films. Rosemary's work is described as a moving portraiture of the performing individuals and communities she brings together, and an exploration of our relationship with our environment. I've personally had the privilege of working with Rosemary, producing a commissioned work for ZfinMalta titled Threaded Fine. So following a 12-month production period, the work, which was 5 hours in duration and with a cast of 23 dancers, premiered this year on the 1st of February. But today, I get to just sit and chat with Rosemary about her career in dance. So welcome, Rosemary, and thank you for agreeing to this interview.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to talk to you.
And let's just launch into some questions here. So I'd like to ask you, first of all, what is your earliest memory of dance?
Well, I really didn't look at these questions, so these are completely off-the-cuff responses. I know my earliest experience of dance was being in a carry cot, as they called them in Britain, in my sister's dance class. But if I'm honest, I do not remember that. So my earliest memory of dance might be remembering sort of running around a cold and dusty hall in Lowestoft, which is a small town on the east coast of England, with a wonderful ballet teacher. But I seem to remember that I was trying to be a very good fairy, and there was a girl who was storming around, and she said she was an aeroplane. And I can remember the difference between the two of us, and I can almost sort of sense her body running around with her arms out, really brittle, charging into us all, and me trying to be a little delicate fairy. I think I'd rather be the aeroplane, but there you go.
Yeah, I was actually wondering, I wonder if you had to choose between the two now, which would it be?
Yeah. No, I think the storming, well, perhaps not storming, but running so you can feel the air is one of the best experiences. Yeah.
So following from that then, when did you realize that dance was going to be your life's path? And really, how did you make that happen?
Goodness. Well, it's funny when you try to think of a key moment in these kinds of interviews, isn't it? And what comes into your mind first, and do you trust that? Because as you were talking, I have this distinct physical memory of doing this exercise with a teacher called Ross McKim, who I think was a teacher at teaching Graham at London Contemporary School of Dance, which was an early conservatoire in Britain. And I must have gone there as a little ballet dancer in my teens to do a weekend workshop in London. And I remember this thing of having my feet bare and having them in parallel and doing a little exercise where you're not prancing exactly, but you're raising your foot and pushing your toes into the floor and then pointing it and then putting your foot down bit by bit. Now, this is a really known exercise now, Cunningham, Graham, whatever. But for me, it was like a revelation when I first did that, to treat my foot in that way and without a ballet shoe on. Mm-hmm. It was revelatory. And I remember in that moment feeling in my gut, this is what I want to do. It was purely a movement of the foot. Isn't that so strange? And yet I then went on, I think I must have been 14, 16 then, and I had no experience of contemporary dance. I was really in a backwater with a sort of 1950s education on some level. Well, not in my schooling, but in the sort of ballet and modern dance and tap. It was very traditional. So this was my first experience of something contemporary. But then I went on to think that I would be a visual artist. But again, because I grew up without a kind of 60s training in my art, I was still painting with powder paint when I was a sixth former. I felt I had no right to be an artist because I didn't understand abstract art. You know, I was still making figurative, impressionistic like paintings. And so when I was 18, and I come from quite a scientific background, and a background that really feels that felt that women, that all of us, any of us, we were 3 girls, should go to university, should get a degree. So I just went without saying that I had to do something that got me a degree. So I decided I'd be an art historian, and I got a place at Manchester to read art history. But I think in my gap year, which was very rare then to take those then, that's 30 plus years ago, in the late 70s, no one was taking a gap year. But I must have intuitively sensed something wasn't right and that I needed a break to think. And in that break, I carried on doing ballet. I was working in a community, actually, in a Quaker community, studying international peace studies and theology, and living together in an inclusive community of mixed ages, which I think had a huge effect on me and on my work. And during that time, I was going to some awful ballet classes in Birmingham. And on the table in the waiting room, before I went into this dreadful ballet class, was the Dancing Times, a newspaper or a magazine. And at the back of that, I found an advert that said degree in dance. And I was like, a degree in dance? I can do a degree in dance. I'm doing that. And so I took myself off to an audition on my own. My parents I don't think they knew. I went down to London. I did the audition. I got into the Laban Centre, and the rest is history. So it was because it was a degree, and that I could still carry on the family tradition in a sense, that had begun with my father, but that held academic and education very highly, I think, and I believed in that. I felt like, well, I can do that. I can do both. I can have a degree and I can be a dancer. And it was a conservatoire training. So I got my training, and yeah, but it was just luck, complete luck, that I saw that magazine.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. So when you say conservatoire training, do you mean classical training?
I mean that in a university, it's harder to have enough time to do enough training to be a dancer. So, I mean, there's some fantastic university courses now, but at that time there were none. Mm. So I'd stress the word conservatoire to mean that I was getting a degree for my family and for me, but I was also doing technique classes twice a day. You know, I'd have a ballet class and a technique class and choreography and music history. And so in those days, that was very rare, to be able to do as much technique as if you were training a vocational training, and to also be studying it as an academic form. Do you see what I mean? That was quite new.
Yeah.
Much less so now, but it was then quite new.
So then, can you explain or describe how that training, and say, you mentioned briefly the type of dance that you had been doing up to that point. You mentioned, did you say tap dancing?
Yeah, a little bit. I was hopeless. I kept stopping. Whenever I got to the wing, which is a movement that I can't do to save my life, I would give up. And then 2 years later, I'd start again, get to the wing and give up. So I wasn't very good. But yeah, and modern, it was kind of I suppose it did have contemporary elements, but goodness knows what it was. Little bits of jazz in it. Yeah. It was ISTD, the Imperial Society for Teachers Dance, is it? Oh, gosh, I don't know what it stood for, but you know, I did my exams, and I danced. I performed a lot, though. You know, those small private ballet schools. I know Malta has many of them, and in those days, Britain did too. But it meant that I performed all through the summer. I was doing pantomimes and musicals and summer fates. I had a performance every week. I remember thinking as a professional that I danced more as a child than I did as a professional, because I was a freelancer. Mm-hmm. Perform more. Dreadful thing to admit, but it's true. So I learned what it was to perform, and I took that very, very seriously. What is it to perform, and what's my relationship with the audience, and how I took it really seriously. And I remember ballet mums saying, why don't you smile more when you're dancing? And I was so aggrieved, smile, this is serious. So you know, even then, I think I took it as a very serious art form, which I still do. So, so you asked me how did that training at the Laban Centre affect me?
Well,
I
even,
think,
even I mean that training and what you'd done up until that point,
yeah,
how did all of that, all of those techniques and those experiences that you were just describing, how has that informed your the way
practice now.
movement features
Yeah,
in your work now? What's, you know,
yeah.
how's that relationship?
Well, let me start. So at the beginning, if you imagine that I was doing things like pantomimes, it meant, and very much community settings, this is not professional, you know, these are things that are set up by people to entertain each other in their community. And I say that with great admiration, actually, for those organizations. You know, I probably, as a young professional, poo-pooed at my background and didn't talk about it. But actually, what it taught me was, how do you work within a community? How can you have inclusive practice with people who want to be professional dancers, with people that have never danced, with people that have never acted, with people with mental health needs or physical needs, who come from all different classes. I remember as a child thinking, this is the only place where I could be a dancer and my French teacher is the lead male. You know, I didn't like my French teacher, but he was on stage with me. It's the only place where people that my father was the boss of were mixing with me. It's the only place where I met people with special needs who were there sharing the stage. It's where I saw people's troubles. I think I picked them up as a child. I could sense their back. I could sense that this was something unique, that we were sharing a space together, and that there were middle class people there and working class people there, and people who were normally ostracized by society and people who were held in great esteem by society were sharing the same space. And even though there was a soloist and chorus mentality, there was a communal atmosphere, and people, from what I could see as a small child, I sensed that this was something that didn't happen very often. And I think, therefore, the work I then made, which is about displaying community and forming communities, even if for very short periods of time, is actually very similar to what I experienced as a child and to what I thought was very potent and remarkable. So I have a lot to thank that background, even if it was, you know, the 60s, somehow it passed them by. I have a lot to thank that, yeah, that place for, because I think it instilled in me the desire to create encounters like that, to make places happen, or to give rise to a place where people could meet. They don't need to talk necessarily, but they could meet somehow and collectively give rise to an endeavor, a creative endeavor together. Also, I come from a Quaker background. On one side, that's also very flat hierarchy. There's no vicar. You sit together in silence. That had a massive influence on me. This collective gathering to find something unsayable. That's what I'm doing now. It's the same thing. And then I suppose that Laban himself, I don't know that much about him, but I think his work really influenced how we were trained. And I studied sociology with a famous man who brought ballet to all. I think it was called Ballet for All, that he set up, called Peter Brinson. And he led a small group of us to look at sociology and the role of arts in society. So I was already starting to look at ways that I could be an artist and be a useful citizen at the same time. And I think that probably wouldn't have happened anywhere but Laban. So I wanted to somehow marry an expertise with high production values and make beautiful work, but have it accessible and reachable to a really different kind of audience and participants.
You really have achieved that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what I'm aimed at anyway.
No, experienced that firsthand here. I want to ask also, can you pinpoint, was there ever a turning point or a moment in your career or a moment that launched your career, or an event?
Yeah, I think there are several that sort of had big effects on me, but I think the big signature piece for me is a piece that I made called Egg Dances in 1988. And that had 13 dancers in it, the music of Arvo Part, before he became, just before he became hot stuff, so to speak. I was working with his music quite a bit as a young choreographer, and I met him actually, which was just fantastic. Around that time when I made Egg Dances. And there are 13 dancers of all ages, starting with 9, going up to 77. There's quite a lot of women in it. It's less men and more women, particularly around the sort of middle age bracket were all women. And that was important to me, that the middle of the group was this group of women. And Egg Dances came about after a piece I made called New Springs from Old Winters that had about 75 performers of all ages in Oxford. And for that piece, it was the first piece I directed alone. I'd done quite a lot of collaborative work with other people, but this was my first big project that I directed alone, invited by Joint Work, a small company in Oxford. And I had a lot of time, luckily, then. I was living between New York and England, and I had some time in New York to really research what I wanted to make. And for New Springs from Old Winters, I researched rituals of dark and light, very relevant for today, I feel, where we're coming into the light of spring, but we're in very dark times. And looking at how different cultures all over the world embrace darkness and embrace the coming of light. And that's what I made the whole work about. And Egg Dances then 2 years later or a year later, became a distillation of that research. So it's 13 dancers with dozens and dozens of eggs that in the end get laid out by the children all over the stage, and the adults walk blindfolded through the eggs, and they never break them, but they have to feel them with their feet. And I'd love to redo that piece, and I've never been able to, which is a great sadness to me. Maybe it's something I can do in Malta in the future, because I would love to revive it. And I would absolutely love to revive it. But for me, that got taken onto the Place stage, so London Contemporary, where I had that experience of thinking dance was for me. John Ashford was the programmer at the time and director of the theatre, and it was very, very unusual to have an intergenerational work on a stage that championed professional work. And still do, I feel that there are unnecessary divisions between what is termed community dance and high art, so to speak. And I aim to make high art, but crossing and with community. So the fact that what I considered, one of my best pieces, and which had children and adults in, was taken onto that stage. I think, it began. I think it was it sounds strange to say, but I think that was a action that changed things for community dance here, put it on the map in some way, put intergenerational work on the map, because I think I'm right in saying it was probably the first work like that to even be put on stage in that context. And it put me on the map a little bit, in a small way. So for me, that dance is really significant, and I feel I revisit it every few years. The work I make is affected by those two works, New Springs from Old Winters and Egg Dances. They're the beginning of my career, and they're woven through it all the way. Yeah.
It sounds like you need to produce that work again.
I know, because it's I missed my 30-year anniversary. I couldn't find a way to fund it, and I would have liked to and it was going to be put on at the place they wanted to put it on, but I would need a bit of money for 13 performers now. Times are different.
This program, this project Dancers Us that ZfinMalta is running during this as you say, very dark time, It's aiming to show the relevance of dance. That's a term we're using, and how the notion that how does the notion that dance is a vital art form for our time manifest in your work?
Mm. Huh. Well, I think it manifests in different ways. Again, it's quite hard to talk about your work. You sound a bit like you've been too proud of it or something. But what I'm trying to do, let's talk about the aims of it. Whether it manages it or not is another matter. But I absolutely believe that dance is a vital form of human behaviour, actually. It's not just a vital art form. It is part of how we behave. I really believe that we dance as part of our evolution. We dance as humans. It's part of the state of being human.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've come to that feeling quite recently, really, as I've watched children and animals actually, and thought about it, and thought about what is the first utterance, what is the first expression of ourselves, what would we do? And I think, you know, we jump for joy. We do jump for joy. It happens in our bodies. We sink, you know, when we're depressed. And so I think and therefore I think, you know, it's just part of who we are. It's part of what it is to be human. It's a human right in a way to dance. So that's one thing. And then, so I suppose in making work that has children and older people and all ages, and has people that have training and don't have training, it's hopefully highlighting that we are all dancers and that dance is part of human behaviour. Secondly, by putting it in places that aren't always aren't always on a stage, aren't always theatres, means that I guess I'm saying, you know, dance is not just an art form for the few. It's not for the people that can pay the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for the people that can just pay for the training. It's for everyone in a sense, without it being diluted down to some jolly big dance thing, which I'm not particularly interested in. I see it as a form of kind of poetic expression. And therefore, if I try and put it outside the theatre sometimes, I know Malta brought me back into it, and I'm so glad. Perhaps we can come back to that. Theatre's a wondrous, wondrous, magical, transformative, alchemic space. But bringing that kind of notion of a sort of transformative, alchemic event, I'm using the outdoors to do that as well. And by doing that, I think I'm perhaps highlighting that this dance that our lives are dances. Our lives are dances in relationship to our environment. Our environment is us. We are our environment. So that relationship, that dancing relationship, is also vital. So don't know if I'm answering your question, but it feels like that's another way of addressing that, is to put it in a different context, so that it's highlighting our relationship with our environment, and the fact that we're part of it, not even our relationship. To say that distances us, that we are nature and nature is us, is more to the point. And I think that's fundamentally at the heart of dance. So it's in our nature. We are that nature of movement. I mean, movement is a condition for life. So,
and I think that this belief, this philosophy of yours, is something that you share with the people you collaborate with and with your audiences, and I've been witness to that, to see that the profound effect that working on a Rosemary Lee project has on the participants. The 23 dancers we had in Threaded Fine were, I think, you know, I think I've said to you, I've used the word indelible, the mark that it's left on them, and they're still talking about it, and they say they'll never forget this experience. So I mean, I'm sure you have many, many stories like this, many examples, but is there anything that really stands out for you, any experience of an effect that your work has had on participants or audiences that has, you know, just really stayed with you and made it
what a
so
lovely
worthwhile?
question. Yeah, what a lovely question. I've got a few, and I mean, it's lovely to hear that, because, you know, I had that experience as a dancer, and all I want to do is share that with other people and give as many people as I can the experience that I cherish, that makes me feel more alive, and be a better alive person in some way. that's all I want to do, is share it with other people. So I'm glad if that's happening, and it's why I've tried to do what I do. Yes, I actually think that Threaded Fine is really, really memorable for me. Actually, I know it's my most recent memory, but when we finished Threaded Fine, when we finished the 5 hours, and I was lucky enough to be dancing in that one, which is rare for me. So I was there taking a bow with the dancers. I was pretty stunned by the reaction, but I'd also felt it by being in the audience and watching the other dancers when I wasn't dancing or warming up. I could feel this acute, intense attentiveness in the audience. And I was really touched by that and really glad. And because I thought, this is what I was aiming at, this is what I aim for. And I'm feeling it firsthand. Thank goodness it's working. You know, something is going right. Because when you're outdoors, it's much more dissipated and you don't feel it. So I might be standing under a tree and I feel people a few meters away, but it's not so intense and condensed like in a theatre. That's why I'm so glad I came back into it, because it affirmed for me the power of theatre, but the power of the community of audience and dancer, and the power of every human being to be attentive. And you know, I think everything conspires against our attentiveness in our lives. And you know, moments like this and moments of watching dance and giving yourself time to be attentive and open, to listen with every sort of pore in your body, every cell in your body, is it's much needed. And it means we make better decisions and judgments in our lives, you know. And I think that unfortunately technology, wonderful though it is, can also lessen those experiences. So and I'm going to say one other thing. Well, maybe two others, because they're different. So that's an experience of an audience. Here's another one. A little boy in the East End of London. He comes into the workshop late. He's been held back by the head teacher because of anger management. He struggles with anger. He comes in and he's boiling with anger. And I love him somehow. I love that boy. And he comes in and I try to bring him into the workshop, calm him down. I'm using lots of metaphors and I'm talking about extending our arms and being like weather gods. I'm preparing them for a film. And I'm saying, you're like a traffic cop, but you're a traffic cop for the weather. So you're guiding the weather, you're bringing the wind in, you're bringing the sunshine out, you're making a thunderstorm, etc. And in that, I'm talking about their arms extending. And I said, can you imagine that your arm extends all the way to the moon? Can you keep it going? Can you keep it going? And I looked at him and I saw his arm going to the moon. I've never seen anything like it. I saw it and I saw it and I saw it. And I stopped the whole class and I said, look at him. I can't quite remember his name, which is making me sad because I've always remembered it up to now. But anyway, let's call him Wayne for now. Look at Wayne, look at him. He's going to the moon. And everyone could see it and he could feel it. And as he felt it, he was saying to me, I have never got something before. I have never got anything before. And what he meant was he'd never been good at school. He'd never understood anything, but he understood this. He understood this feeling. And he was so proud of himself that I'd singled him out, that he got it. And I think that little experience just sums up so much, because it's about knowledge being in the body. It's about confidence. It's about being who you are. It's about magic. It's about poetry. It's about imagery. It's about what that could have done for that little boy just for a second, you know? So that's my other favourite memory of all time. And I often wonder what happened to him.
Exactly. I was just going to say, if only you knew
I know.
what had become of him.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's never forgotten that.
I hope not. I hope not. Yeah, he taught me a lot.
I want to ask you a question about the way your work is very collaborative, obviously, and you've already spoken quite a lot about that. But is there anything that you would add to, the ways that you choose your collaborators with, and how critical that is to your work.
Yeah, it's really critical. And I think I'm collaborating more as I get older, in the sense that for Threaded Fine, I worked with Sophie, who then became the rehearsal director for ZfinMalta and led some of the workshops and was another pair of eyes. That was just such a fantastic partnership to have someone that's seeing the work, that's trying to make it manifest from my ideas. So we'd be in the studio and I'd have an idea and I'd say, could you play with that? Would that work? Could you imagine a child understanding that? How would we adapt it? Is that too difficult? What does it feel like as a dancer? All of that was really a fascinating, very nuanced, intelligent kind of collaboration that I'm very thankful for. So that's new for me, and I'm loving it, because I often have to devise alone, and then I bring a team in, and all the division is done by myself away from the dancers, because if I've got 50 dancers, I can't devise much of that just on site with 50 dancers. There's never time, and it's too much standing around for them, and there's too many cooks. So the collaboration is sort of specific with certain people. However, the collaborative nature of me and the performers is also massive. And I think that's true for any choreographer, but I think sometimes it's understated, or under-recognized. So for me, selecting the dancers for Threaded Fine, because it's not open for all, my work is rarely like anyone who wants to do this can come and do it. That would be what happened in my pantomime, but it's not what I do. So, well, who knows whether it happened then, but that's what I imagined as a child. Anyone can be involved in this somehow. That I do some projects like that, but it depends on the site and what the site needs. So for Threaded Fine, looking for the participants in Threaded Fine in its mother piece, Circadian, I'm looking for soloists. I'm looking for people that I can tell in the selection workshop have an innate openness. Mm-hmm. So if there's something that feels locked in the way they approach something, in the way they listen, in the way they take on a new image, I know that with time I could work on that, but that I don't have time. Mm-hmm. So for any project I do, I need that initial openness, or I need to know that I could get that person open very quickly.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in that openness, in someone that's, and I'm not always open, I can feel myself close myself down. You know, I'm not some perfect human being in the slightest. So I take my hat off to these amazingly open, courageous people I work with. I'm looking for someone, if you're open, you're courageous. If you're open and courageous, you're also going to learn. If you're open and courageous, you're also generous. Yeah. So all those things become something that means that they will be able to give their dance to the audience, give it to themselves.
And be part of that group dynamic, which is also so important.
Yeah, yeah.
Watching the way that those dancers formed a bond was quite magical for me, being on the outside. Well, not on the outside, but it was extraordinary to witness. It really was. For me, that was one of the highlights of the project. That bonding. And that incredible level.
And that's interesting. I think that, sorry, I overlapped you there. I'm sorry. I think that's interesting you witnessed that, because I think that may be what's so special about dance, that it does have that capability. I mean, otherwise, why do we dance? It's not that, I think we think in Western society, somehow we think of dance as being an individual expression of our distinctive natures, our individuality. Yes, that's possible. It does. And Threaded Fine showed that. Yeah. But equally, dance is about collectivity. It's about ritual. It's about how, think about a French dance, the wonderful dancers from Brittany that I've been so influenced by in my previous work. Think about those dances and what that does for a community. It doesn't need to be said. They just need to dance in that line for an hour. And they may never be able to say why that's important, but I think we know it is.
Oh, yeah.
So, so I think What am I trying to say? Why, how does that link to what you're saying? Oh, that it bonds us, and it's no mean, it's no what's the word, coincidence that those social forms of dance involve touch. And touch is what I use as a really quick way to start bonding happening.
Yeah.
So I mean,
in my own experience of dance,
yeah,
one of my most vivid memory, I mean, there are many, but you know, that feeling of when you're on a dance floor in a nightclub with a you know, DJ, and you feel that the entire room is moving, folding, unfolding, you know, as one. As I mean, it's such an extraordinary, I guess, deeply tribal, you know,
yeah,
experience,
yeah,
more
yeah,
exhilarating for me than that feeling. So
yes,
yeah,
yes. No, I think you're right. Yeah, yeah,
I
and
I want to finish up with a question about audience engagement with dance. I think, you know, quite often people are intimidated by contemporary dance, contemporary art in general, and you so often hear people say, "But I don't understand it," and that will hold people back. That will make them hesitate in engaging. And so I just wondered if you could say something to that about. You know, just a message to anyone who's holding back, you know,
mm,
how you
um,
encourage them to trust their judgment.
yeah. I think one thing would you say then there might not be anything to understand. So I think that we may be putting something about getting it, going back to our little boy there. But we can see how strong his desire was to get something.
Yeah.
So if we feel we don't understand, we don't know, we're left in this unknown territory, feeling lost, it's not clear, uh, we feel frightened, I think, in that place. So that fear then holds us back because we're like, I don't get it. There's something wrong with me. I know that feeling. I have it. I still have it. We go to dance things and people stand up all around me and I'm like, what did they see that I missed there? You know, so I'm not saying I'm not saying I have any answers. All I would say is you're right. Trust your instinct. Do you enjoy watching it? Then carry on. It doesn't matter if you don't get it. I don't get Shakespeare sometimes. I'm very slow, and yet I know it's utter genius, and I'll still go and see it. I'm sure I miss loads and loads of Beckett, but I know it's utter genius, and I'll go and watch it. So I feel the same about some dance stuff, even newer stuff where I'm like a little bit slow. When I first saw Cunningham, I was like, oh, I'm struggling here, but I know there's something here. And then I started to love it. So embrace your struggle. Don't worry about the struggle. Don't try and make any sense of something because there may be no sense to be made. It could be rubbish, and call it. You know, there's some bad work out there. Yeah, yeah. There's some weaker work. There's some stronger work. It's not just a subjective thing. Perhaps I dare to say. I'm not sure I agree with that. What's just come out of my mouth, but it's out there now. But you know, in other words, if it's not for you, fine. You know, but there may be something that tells you, there was something there, and I'm not there yet. Well, maybe go again and just check. Something might open up. So, but I don't think there's not. We're so used to trying to get a narrative, a logic to something, and yet there isn't a logic. You know, like I'm looking at you now, and there's a patchwork behind you, a sort of applique thing with some elephants on it. It's obviously Indian, right? There's nothing to get there. It's just pleasing. Well, maybe some dances like that, you know. And then other things I can see around you, like there's a Chagall, I think, on the right-hand side. I think, is it? It looks like a Chagall to me. Now there's probably.
I'm not in my own home at the moment.
Yeah, I know you're not. No, but I'm a bit of a fan of Chagall because I sense this kind of culture in him. I don't know it because I'm not Jewish, but I sense this history in him, and I don't need to understand the specifics of that. I'm sensing something in that work. So you know what I mean? So that's enough for me. I know there's something powerful there, and I want to witness it, but I may not ever understand it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, that's perfect. That's
Mm.
perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. We could just talk for, I could listen to you for hours. We could talk for hours. And we should get you to do another one of these. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much again for just showing what incredible generosity you have, you know, in everything you do. So it's been wonderful.
Well, thank you. What's not to lose, especially at the moment? The more generosity we can have in the world, the better, eh? Good. All right. Take care. Bye. Bye.